My name is DDelgado, and for this presentation, I will be briefly discussing my research and going over my findings and some implications for the textual analysis project. Now, I was interested in studying stakeholder engagement through a systems perspective, specifically engagement on social media. Before I dive into that, I do want to give some background on the organization that I drew my artifact or artifacts from, which is International Rescue Committee, or IRC. So, IRC is a large international not-for-profit organization, and their work is focused around responding to humanitarian crisis all over the world. There's a lot of work on climate disaster response, response to violence and displacement in different countries, and so on. So they're really well known in the nonprofit world. They've partnered with a lot of different organizations as well as several celebrities, which I do think is telling to their stakeholder engagement. And they've received many accolades, but one in particular that really caught my eye is their grade A on Charity Watch. Now, Charity Watch is an organization that conducts deep dives to look at how donor dollars are being spent at different organizations. For IRC, 87% of their budget goes back into their program work, while only 13% is used to cover overhead costs like operations, fundraising, management, and general expenses. So, of course, that's really impressive. And IRC also, for every $11 spent on fundraising, they're able to raise $100. So these stats piqued my interest because, again, I do think it's really telling to their stakeholder engagement paired with how well recognized they are by um, different organizations outside of the nonprofit world and even by celebrities. And it also speaks to the use of cost-effective fundraising methods. So these two things combined led me to believe that this has something to do with their social media presence. With experience working in a nonprofit, I know that social media is heavily relied on because it is a cost-effective way to promote yourself as an organization, to interact with the audience and engage stakeholders. And just make people informed about the issues that you're addressing, as well as the work that you do. So I started to look at their social media. I do want to point out that through my research, I referred to stakeholders as if they're internal parts of the organization, and as I approach my observation from a systems lens, I do consider stakeholders a part, of the organization rather than external stakeholders. So back to social media, looking at IRC's social media, they have a well-established social media presence. On Instagram, they have 270,000 followers, which surpasses the average for large nonprofits whose follower count typically reaches only 19,000. On Twitter, they have 414,000, and Facebook, they have 886,000. So you can see that they're very active and that they have established a following. So for my artifact, I decided to observe their Instagram, specifically looking at Instagram posts ranging from August 29th to August 9th. Within that time frame, there were 25 Instagram posts, and the reason I chose this date range is because I wanted to look at how IRC, um, how the content they produce when addressing a crisis. So looking at the 2022 flooding crisis in Pakistan, which has displaced over 7 million people and resulted in the death of over 1,700 victims since June of 2022, IRC did address this crisis and was starting to develop programs as well as try to fundraise for these programs, and I wanted to see what their social media content looked like. Their first post regarding this crisis was on August 29th, and I capped the date at October 9th. So, how did I apply systems theory? I do believe that the characteristics of systems theory indirectly contribute to the growth of IRC's social media presence, resulting in the success of their private funding as well as all of the recognition that they receive. Um, within this industry and outside of the industry. Now, IRC social media strategies create a sense of involvement and membership that stakeholders feel, perhaps through processes like interdependence. Um, this process, coupled with the idea that IRC social media content is used as a guide for sense making or making sense of uncertainties in environments, reveals that systems theory can help us understand how IRC stakeholders remain consistently engaged and supportive and participate in funding during, through a plethora of crises. Currently there is a gap in research that uses system theory as a framework to analyze stakeholder communication. However, research has been conducted to observe the dynamics of sense making and information seeking from communities as they endure a crisis. And there is research that studies how social media is used as a medium for sense making. These are my two research questions that guided my methodology. The first one speaking to how components of systems theory have been used to create crisis response content, specifically in my case, the 2022 flooding crisis. And then question number two, within social media campaign, like the flooding in Pakistan, what patterns and frequency of imagery and text contributes to the process of sense making done by external stakeholders? So for my methodology, I analyzed imagery and text. So I tracked the frequency of distressing images displayed in these posts, distressing images being people in dangerous circumstances or images of devastation. I also tracked how many thumbnails, the previews of, posts you see on an Instagram profile contained these images. And for text, I tracked terms such as Pakistan, flooding, emergency, crisis by itself, disaster, displaced, danger, climate crisis, global warming, and to see if there were any statistics regarding a crisis featured in the post. So within those 39 days from August to October, I found that IRC posted 25 times. 10 of those posts directly related to Pakistan flooding. So a good chunk of those posts were in reference to the flooding in Pakistan. 9 out of 11 posts, 9 out of 10 posts that featured that covered the flooding in Pakistan featured distressing images in the thumbnail, and 13 out of the 25 overall posts contained a distressing image. So the most popular terms used in these posts from the terms that were in the actual post itself as well as the caption were climate crisis, which was used 29 times, Pakistan, which was used 26 times, and flood, which was mentioned 22 times. So those were the top three most um, used terms within these posts. So I do think that this shows IRC does a great job of keeping their audience informed on events as they continue to play out or crises as they continue to play out. And I do believe this is what fuels the sense making process. So when they initially announced that there is a crisis happening in Pakistan with their first post on August 29th, throughout those 39 days, they continue to mention Pakistan, the flood. And in their original post, they do mention that this is a direct result of the climate crisis, and climate crisis was used as the number one term. So I do think that this research can help support that social media is used as a medium for the process of sense making, but I would be interested in exploring other opportunities for future research looking at sense making as a framework to observe stakeholder communication. Some limits to my research. I would have liked to observe a crisis that IRC has been covering for a longer amount of time. Again, this flooding in Pakistan, as far as the 2022 flooding occurred, they just recently started posting about, but there are other crises that I know they've been covering for a few years. I would also think it would benefit if I had some type of access to the amount of shares per post, how many posts were either shared on Instagram or externally, as well as internal information like fundraising and the amount for different crises they're able to raise if that is something that they track. So, of course, there are always limitations to research, but for now, I hope that you enjoyed listening a little bit about my project, and I look forward to finding out and learning more about all of your research moving forward. So, thank you for listening, and here are my references.